In this review, I'm going to discuss another cool product for your AR-based rifle. Now, if you've watched my past videos, you'll notice that I don't like some of the things I don't like about the AR is the loose tolerances between the upper and the lower receiver. And you might have seen a video I did, a review on a product called an AccuWedge that goes inside your lower receiver that takes up a bit of the slack between your upper and your lower receiver. And that's a great inexpensive add-on if that slack bothers you. Recently it came to my attention that there was another company that offered a similar type of product, and the company name is Varmintlights.com. I'll put that in the description of the video. And they're out of Austin, Texas. And the guys down there, they make a few different types of products, and the X-Shim is one of them. And what it is it's a shimming kit that goes around your upper receiver lugs, and there's enough in the kit to cover your pivot pin lug and your takedown lug. And they come in different thicknesses that allow you to use just exactly the thickness that you need to eliminate the wobble between your upper and your lower receiver. The front may take a different size than the rear, or you may need you can stack these as well. So you can take two of the shims and stack them in the rear for a thicker fit, and so on. And the kit also includes a shim gauge, which is it's made out of the same material as the shim, but it's basically just a gauge that you could slide in between your upper and lower receiver to gauge what thickness you should start with, which is a cool idea. So this package that we see right here, this is basically the POP packaged shim kit that ships from Varmintlights.com. And it's designed to be hanged in a retail environment. Nice little package. Got a barcode number on the bottom of it. Their web address, which is x-shim.com. And then it just basically talks about the shim kit. And it says the kit contains enough parts to fix 1 to 2 rifles, depending upon the amount of wear or misalignment to the upper and lower receivers. And I would agree that there's probably enough parts in there. You could do 2 rifles. You may have to stack a couple of the shims together to do a second rifle if you use up some of the shims in the first rifle. But it definitely appears that there's enough there to do possibly 2 rifles. This is easy to open, so this isn't a complicated packaging. It's not stapled. It just kind of pops open there. And this is the shim kit here. It comes in this little Ziploc bag. And the instruction sheet. The instruction sheet, obviously, it talks about unloading your rifle before you start working on it and so on. And you can see that there's different shim sizes for the rear and for the front. And there's the gauge, R1, R2, R3 gauge. And it talks about starting with the rear lug, measuring the tolerances with the shim gauge. And then if that shim gauge is not thick enough, you stack it with another shim gauge, and that kind of gives you an idea of what size shims you need to either use or to stack together. So that's kind of cool to include the shim gauges. Over here it talks about installing the shim, and Basically, it basically steps you through doing the rear shim, and then it tells you to repeat the same procedure for doing the front. And it also talks about down here, if you're using a free float tube with no gap between the front lug and forearm, you will need to trim the thin section away from the shim to be able to install it correctly. I'm going to be using a Spikes AR rifle for the installation of the shim kit. This is the same AR rifle I installed the AccuWedge in, so there definitely is some upper receiver and lower receiver wobble, and I'm going to try and eliminate it with the X-Shim kit. So those are the instructions. It seems pretty straightforward. And this is the shimming kit right here. And these are made out of some sort of thin plastic type material. They are not adhesive backed. I did inquire about that. So there's the R1, which is red, and the R2. Now you may not be able to see this on the screen too well, but there's basically these little squares. There's a cutout. There's two different cutouts, and then there's the shimming gauge cutout. And you basically peel these off, and you start with using the feeler gauge first, and before you peel off these other actual shims and install them. So you've got 4 of these, and they are different thicknesses. I believe they're listed as 0.002, 0.003, 0.004, and 0.005. You'll have to pardon me while I read the instructions and explain this at the same time, because I am opening this for the first time on camera. Go back to the blue one. The front shims are these long rectangular ones, and you can see this blue one. You may not be able to see it, but it says F4 to indicate front, and the rear one is R4 to indicate the rear. So they have different shapes, and then the gauge basically says gauge on it. So there's no misunderstanding which one goes on the front and which one goes on the rear with those. So I'm going to go ahead and take apart my rifle and reposition the camera so we can get going at the installation. Okay, I have my Spikes AR on the table here, so I can kind of show you. You may not be able to see this, but I'm sure you can hear. That's the wobble between my upper receiver and lower receiver. Now it's not major, it's not a lot, but it is a little bit of a wobble. So that's what we're going to try and eliminate here with the shim kit. Okay, so I believe it says to start with the smallest, which is the R1 shim gauge. That's the red one here. And bear with me as I peel this off. Okay, this just peels off. And we either slide this in. You can see that this slides in real easy. So I would think that that's too thin. So we move up to the next one, which would be the R2 at 0.003. And that would be the green one. So we step through these. Now this one fits a little bit tighter, but it's still pretty loose. So we'll step up to the F3, which is this kind of yellowish color, or butterscotch color. And the F3, or the R3, excuse me, R for rear, is 0.004. And as we step up in thickness, I can tell these are definitely thicker. Now that one's getting a little bit better, or it's a little tighter. So I'm all the way up to the thickest one, which is the R4, the blue one at 0.005. Now this one fits pretty tight. So I'm thinking that I can put the R5 in the back. I mean, if that wasn't enough, you would take the R4 and the R1 and put those two together. You'd stack them, and yeah, I believe you stack the gauges, and it's looking like I can't get both of those in there. So I'm going to stick to the R4 for the rear. And moving on to the front, now I'm not sure if we're supposed to be using the shim gauges on the front or not. I'm reading the instructions here off camera, and it talks about using the shim gauge, and it says on the rear only. So I'm a little confused on whether or not I should be using these shim gauges on the front, but I'm going to try it. The R1 is not thick enough. I'll go to the R2, which is the green. That's a little bit better. Step it up one more. To the R3, the yellow one. Okay, so the R3 is still a little loose. Now I've already used the R4 for the rear. And we'll try the R4 on the front as well. Well, it looks like the R4 is a little loose on the front. So I'll stack the R4 and the R1 shims together and try those on the front. Well, this is a little tricky to stack these together and try and fit these in the between the upper and the lower. Well, I'm not able to get these two stacked shims in. So what I'm going to try first is I'm going to try the R4 on the rear and the R4 on the front and see if that eliminates the wobble. So again, going back to the upper and lower receiver, you can hear I got a little bit of a wobble right there. So I'm going to go ahead and take this apart, and we'll install the shims, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, I've got the upper and the lower receiver taken apart, and we have our R4 shims, the 0.005 shims, and this is the rear that I'm peeling off. And according to the instructional sheet, the rear installs like so, and you'll notice there's a little tab right here. I believe that little tab is to aid in keeping this in place so it doesn't come off. And we just slide this down like so until it sits flush. And with that little tab right there, I had to kind of push on this to get it to go down, so it doesn't look like this is just gonna, if you take your rifle apart for cleaning, I don't believe these are going to fall off from what I can tell by looking at this. So there's the rear one installed. And the front one, we're just peeling these off. Now I believe the front one, if you notice, I'm holding this so the lettering is right size up, and you have a thin edge and you have the thick edge. If I'm reading the instructions correctly, get this position a little better. The thin edge goes towards your handguard. Now there is no little notch on the front one. And since I am using a free float tube, there is no gap between the receiver and the tube. And as you can see, I'm trying to get this to fit, and it's not going down all the way because there is no gap right there. And the instructions specifically state that if you're using a free floating tube with no gap, you'll need to trim the thin section away from the shim to be able to install it correctly. And it talks about trimming away this little thin section right there. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this off camera, and we'll continue forward. Okay. Well, you can see I've trimmed off the thin section right there, and to get this to fit better, and of course it does fit right down there now, and it clears the free float tube. Now this one is not tight, so if you completely break down your upper from your lower for cleaning and maintenance and such, you definitely might want to pay attention to this one. This is possible that this might fall off. I don't know. It's a lot looser than the rear one, especially since I cut that front section off. And I'll address that shortly. So there are the two R4 shims installed. And the next step here is to reassemble the rifle and see if the installation of these has eliminated the upper to lower receiver wobble. Okay, I've reassembled the rifle, and we'll do a little test. And look at that. The wobble is all gone. There's no wobble at all now. So that took care of the wobble on the Spikes tactical rifle. Now, in my the last video I did concerning upper to lower receiver wobble, like I mentioned, I used a AccuWedge, and I'm not going to go into detail about this, but this is an item that fits inside your lower receiver, and it eliminates the wobble that way. Now this is a this is $8 to $10 item also. Now what I don't like about the AccuWedge, this item right here, this is made by another company, it has nothing to do with Varmintlights. What I don't like about the AccuWedge is when it's installed, your rear takedown pin is very hard to push out. Well, for me, I have to use a tool to push it out. I didn't like that with the AccuWedge. That's the only negative I really had with the AccuWedge. Now this X-Shim, the product that we're looking at here, totally different story. You know, I don't have the same problem with the pin. The pin, you know, comes out real easy now. So that's good. And so I definitely like this better. This is definitely an upgrade over the AccuWedge, and it's something I'm going to keep in this rifle. Very nice kit. Wasn't complicated to install. The instructions were clear and concise. I followed the instructions, and you saw me do the different steps with the feeler gauge, and got it done. Now I mentioned that the front one, after cutting it, looks like it may not stay in place. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to make sure that that stays in place. So I'm going to take apart the rifle again, and we'll go from there. Okay, so what you didn't see is when I took the upper and the lower receiver apart, kind of like what I thought, right away the front shim fell off because, you know, I had to trim that for the free float tube. The rear stayed in place because of that little tab right there, so that's cool. It's kind of a bummer that this front one doesn't have a little tab, but you know, since the front's cut away, the tab wouldn't really help it, unfortunately. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you how I'm going to fix this with some adhesive tape that I have. So I'll be right back. Okay, I've got this adhesive tape in my workshop here, and it's not really tape. It's basically just adhesive. So it's made by 3M, and it carries a model number of 300LSE. It's high strength adhesive, and it's not like a two-sided tape or some thick material with adhesive on it. It's just the adhesive. So on this part right here is adhesive, and you attach your piece to this, and then you peel this off right here. So then all you're left with is just the adhesive. So you have a minimum thickness added to something. So this is what I'm going to use because I obviously don't want to add any more thickness to this. I don't believe the use of the adhesive is going to add any thickness to this. It's going to cause a problem. So that's what I'm going to do. So all I need to do is take it off camera, of course. I'm going to cut me a small little piece. And then I'm going to place the shim here on the adhesive. And then I've got to go in with my scissors, and I have to trim around the shim and trim all this excess off. So I won't bore you with that. I'm going to go ahead and trim it, and we'll be back shortly. Okay, off camera, instead of using a scissors, I use the scissors to trim most of the outside area of this shim, but I use this little X-Acto knife, which is great for doing tight work here, because you can put your finger in here and almost hold it like a writing pen. And that's kind of necessary to trim off all the excess, because you don't want to leave any excess material around the shim, because when you peel the backing off, then there'd be adhesive. And so you want to trim that adhesive so it conforms to the shape of this X-Shim. And on the back, you can see that we've got the 3M protective tape on the back. And all I need to do now is peel this off, and I'm ready to install the shim with the adhesive. And having an X-Acto knife is handy because you've got to kind of get the blade in between the shim and this backing material, and you don't want to get it between the shim and adhesive, otherwise you'll peel your adhesive off. and I use the X-Acto knife here to get this paper started. Make sure that I'm not peeling the adhesive off. And of course it'll stick to your fingers a little bit if you're holding it like this. And peel the paper off, and you can see that I got a little bit of excess adhesive right around there, but that's really no big deal. What you don't want is a bunch of adhesive on the outside that may stick out when you put your lower receiver back onto the upper receiver. But a little bit on the inside here isn't going to hurt anything, because that's going to go around. It's going to go right around the lug. And you've got to get it in place and get it unstuck from your finger. You want to get it all the way in place before you push it down. And one of the other things you want to do is, if your lower receiver is really dirty and you're doing this, you want to clean any oil or any residue, anything that might be on your lower receiver that would prevent this adhesive from adhering. So my lower receiver was already clean, and it was just a matter of getting it in place and pressing it down. Now, when I take this apart, no amount of shaking is going to make this drop free, because now I've got some adhesive on the back of it, and it didn't really add any thickness to the lower receiver, or to this shim. Might have added a little bit of thickness, but I don't think that that's going to be a problem here. And so I'm going to reassemble the lower onto the upper and just confirm the fitment. And okay, with the upper and lower receiver reassembled, went together just fine, no wobble whatsoever. So adding the adhesive on the F4 shim didn't add that much thickness. It added just a smidgen, but went together fine, got zero wobble. And now I know if I take the lower off of the receiver for deep cleaning, I don't have to worry about losing the front shim now, because it's adhered on there well. And then of course the rear we don't have to worry about, because it has that little tab on it. So I'm definitely good to go with this rifle. Again, there's no wobble at all. Went together fine. The takedown and the pivot pins pop out real easy. And if you keep your shims, of course they're now peeled off here, little pieces of paper. I have left over the R3, the R2, and the R1. So if I had another rifle, I've got 3 pieces here. So I could, put the thickest, the R3, which is the yellow. I could put the yellow on one area. I mean, you've got some stackability here. I'd have to stack a couple of these together, but there might even be enough to do one more rifle. So that's pretty cool. I don't have another rifle right handy to try this with, but you get the idea that it's almost a 2-for-1 with what you get with the X-Shim kit. So you just have to, if you want to keep these shims, this backing material here is got some adhesive on it. You could probably stick those back on there. Yeah, you could put those back on there and put this back in your Ziploc baggie and hang on to these for another rifle. So if you got another rifle coming in, you've got another kit here that you can use. So My understanding that this X-Shim kit costs about $10. I'm not sure what it would cost from different dealers, but I do believe Varmintlights.com has these on their website for $10. Don't hold me to that. That's just what I remember, but it's definitely right in that ballpark range. So this is a great kit. I'm going to run it on my main rifle, and I'll probably be putting one of these kits on every rifle I build going forward.